Okay, I think I'll go ahead and get started, and if people add in, then we can add them in as they come. But anyways, like I said, this is Money Smart Day. This is the last of our sessions today. This one's on, it's not just about the money, the impact of relationships on finances. I'm Shannon Osborne. I'm the Assistant Director for Financial Wellbeing here in the Student Support and Advocacy Center. So this has been a great day filled with lots of financial literacy sessions. We will be recording this, so like I said, feel free to keep your camera off. We just ask you keep your microphone on mute so that everybody can hear the presenter. There is a chat feature, so feel free to type any questions throughout the time in the chat. We also, because we're recording it, we'll have it on moneysmart.gmu.edu. I'll put that website here in the chat as well. Give me about a week or two to get all the recordings and everything together to put it on there, but you can access the PowerPoints there as well. I will pass it to my awesome colleague, Caitlin, and she'll introduce herself.
Hello, everyone. My name is Caitlin. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am the Assistant Director for Sexual and Interpersonal Violence Prevention and Response within the Student Support and Advocacy Center. I'm really excited to be here with you all today, and thank you for joining us for Money Smart Day.
So we'll jump right in and get started. I'll do the first part of the presentation, and then Caitlin's going to do the back part of the presentation. So we're going to partner here. Maybe, do you want to talk about the content warning first?
Yes, we're just going to do a quick content warning because we're going to be talking about relationships. We're going to be talking a little bit about some unhealthy relationship aspects, some things that might be distressing or difficult to engage with. So if you need to take a break, get some water, do whatever is going to be best for you. And if you find yourself needing any support, you can always reach out to SSAC. We have our phone, email, and website on the screen right now. And I also wanted to let you know that I am a confidential advocate. So if you feel like you need in the moment support, you can directly message me as well.
Okay, so the first part of this presentation is going to talk about financial independence. And I really want to start with, what does it mean to be financially independent? A lot of people have different definitions, and everybody kind of has their own view of what financial independence means for you. It's not necessarily the same as the next person. So what does it mean personally for me? Financial independence for me means being able to support myself and being able to support my family. If you know anything about me, you know I have a son, so being able to take care of him as well too is something that's really important to me when it comes to financial independence. But if you would have asked me pre having the son, I would have said just being able to support myself and my spouse. And I think that definition of financial independence changes throughout time. Another thing might be long term. So you might be thinking about the future, and financial independence at that point might mean a passive income. So having a passive income means not being dependent on employment for income. So saving for retirement now so that you can have passive income in the future and be able to live off your retirement and not be employed in the future. And then also, to some people, it might mean paying off debt. So, student loan debt, credit card debt, mortgage, anything like that, that means just paying off debt over a certain amount of time until you no longer have debt, might be the financial freedom and independence that you're looking for. And for other people, it might mean being able to save or invest, maybe just having a savings account and being able to put some money in there, and then being able to eventually invest it as well and getting return on investment might be that financial independence. You can go to the next one, Caitlin. So the first part, I'm going to talk about being independent and a little bit about dependent, independent on the FAFSA. And then I'm going to talk about independent on taxes as well. So a lot of times, especially when students get to their undergraduate degree, they talk about how do I become independent on my FAFSA? I fill out the FAFSA and it's asking for my parental information, but I've really been paying my own bills. And even though, I have communication with my parents and they're the ones who took me to college, I'm really responsible to paying my own bills. So why are we asking for my parental information when I'm responsible for paying my tuition fees and my books and everything? Well, the FAFSA and the U.S. Department of Education is really strict on what qualifies to be independent. So these are the criteria to qualify for independent on the FAFSA, and I did it for next year. So the 2021-2022 FAFSA will always mirror the academic year. So an academic year begins in the fall and it ends in the summer. Summer is always a trailer. So the first part is fall 2021, spring 2022, and summer 2022 make up the 21-2022. I always struggle saying that. It's like a tongue tie. The 2021-2022 academic year, and thus it's the 2021-2022 FAFSA. And it's always going to be based off previous years, 2 years prior tax information. But in order to qualify to be independent, you have to be able to say yes to one of these questions on the FAFSA, which is why that question is there. And you'll see that when you fill out the FAFSA, it says yes or no to these. So the first one would be, were you born before January 1st, 1998? So the reason that question's on there is because in order to qualify for being independent on the FAFSA, you have to be at least 24 years of age. And they really have a hard cutoff at January 1st. Are you married as of the date that you filed the FAFSA? So not going to be married in the future sometime during the year. It's as of when you officially filed the FAFSA were you married. Are you enrolled in a master's or doctoral program during the 2021-2022 academic year? So anybody who's enrolled in a master's or doctoral program is already considered to be independent status just from that program alone. Are you an active military, active duty member or a veteran of the US military? Do you have any children who get more than half of their support from you between July 1st, 2021 and June 30th, 2022? This can include anybody who's pregnant or a spouse that may be pregnant when you fill out the FAFSA. They know that it does take time, 9 months to get, once you get pregnant until the baby is born. So it's saying at any time during that year, will you have a child? So if you are pregnant when you fill out the FAFSA in, let's say April, right now it's April, but your due date is November, you would put yes, you have a child on the FAFSA, because even though the child is not here yet, the child will be here during that academic year. If you are a male and your spouse is pregnant, that still counts as in your household. So you don't have to be the pregnant person, it's per the household. And you will be supporting that child more than 50%. So you can claim that child on the FAFSA. Are both parents deceased, or are you in foster care? Or are you an orphan ward of the court? These have to be since the age of 13, and these are typically established before you're 18. Parents being deceased could happen afterwards too. I'll get into doing appeals and different changes like that as well with the Office of Student Financial Aid. But foster ward of the court, you would have actual documentation from the court for those. You are or were an emancipated minor or a legal guardianship determined by the state court. So again, you'd have documentation for those. Unaccompanied youth who is homeless or self-supporting or at risk of being homeless, those would have documentation as well. And in addition to it too, I did put a link here for studentaid.gov. That breaks down all of the dependency qualifications for being independent. And so it'll walk you through what documentation would be needed to show a yes to any of these. So again, if you say yes to any of those, the FAFSA will automatically make you independent. But the Office of Student Financial Aid might reach out to you to say, you said yes to ward of the court, so we need documentation to support that. So they still might need documentation to your yes. All right, Caitlin, you can go to the next one. So as I said earlier, you can then do what we call a dependency override appeal. So let's say that you did not meet any of the independent qualifications on the FAFSA. You could possibly do a dependency override appeal with the Office of Student Financial Aid. The reason I say possibly is because I don't want people to get this hope and false hope that it's definitely going to be approved. It gets reviewed by the financial aid office, and it's on the student to submit all the supporting documentation that's needed. And it doesn't always necessarily get approved. But basically, if you are a no to all those questions, but you still feel like you should qualify for being independent, just know that there is a possibility to do an appeal, and you can definitely talk to them as well. So I have an article there that kind of that breaks down reasons that an appeal might be approved and reasons that an appeal probably wouldn't be approved. One of the biggest factors is not being approved is just parents not wanting to pay. Unfortunately, a lot of people do see that, but the government looks at, when it comes to undergrad, that it is the parent's responsibility to help the student get through undergrad, and that once you're in grad school, it's on you to get through grad school yourself. So that's why they are really strict about just parents' refusal to pay is not necessarily qualification for an override. But if you're curious if your situation could qualify, I definitely recommend clicking on that finaid.org article to kind of see what the qualifications are. To give you an example of one of the biggest reasons that the Office of Student Financial Aid might approve your appeal would be if you are in an abusive family environment, example, sexual, physical, or mental abuse or other forms of domestic violence. The financial aid office is not going to force a student to put themselves in harm's way in order to just get parental information on the FAFSA. So if it is not safe for you to get parental information, then you need to work with the Office of Student Financial Aid. You also need to be honest with them. I tell students you don't need to go into the detail about the SIPV related case. However, you do need to give them a little bit of information so they can understand roughly the situation. Then they can guide you into saying, okay, that makes sense. Let's get this documentation to support your case. In those areas, you typically need to have a third-party statement. It doesn't have to be from family, and matter of fact, they prefer if it's not from a family, but somebody who roughly knows about the situation that can vouch for you and say this is the situation that's going on. So that's why I say the financial aid office is definitely there to help. So I tell students all the time to contact the financial aid office. Recently, they changed their contact form, and I actually really like it because it's kind of puts it into different categories. But if you click on that link to contact financial aid, what you're looking for with a dependency override appeal is it's going to say my question is about, and it's going to have a bunch of drop downs. So you'll click on the appeals drop down. And then after you do that, you're going to click on dependency appeal. That's what you're looking for. So if you think you qualify for dependency override appeal, I recommend working with them and just talking to them first. They will let you know when you talk to them, this sounds like something that we would look at, or this does not sound like something we would look at. So before you go to the legwork of getting all the paperwork, just reach out to them, schedule a meeting with them so that you know first. And then if they say, yes, this looks like something we can look at, then they can tell you what documentation is needed. Okay, Caitlin, you can go to the next slide. Okay, so next we kind of transition from the FAFSA dependent versus independent to taxes. So remember I said on the FAFSA that date of January 1st, I think it was 1998, and that 24 years of age. That 24 years of age is coming because of the taxes in the IRS. So the tax, when it becomes taxes, it says that the parents can still claim you on the taxes up to the age of 24. So because they can still claim you, that's why the Department of Education says that they should be able to then be able to pay for your education, and thus they need to have parental information on the FAFSA as well too. So here are the different things that qualify as a qualifying child dependent. So you are the child, stepchild, foster child, sibling, half sibling, step sibling, or descendant of another taxpayer. This generally would be your parent or guardian. You lived with the taxpayer more than half of the year. So even though you live on campus and you're not physically there, they still look at it as the fact that you could be living with your parents at that time. And even though you might physically be in a different environment, the parents are still basically paying for half of your expenses type thing, and they could be sending you money to be living on campus. You are under 19 at the end of the tax year, and you are under 24, a full-time student at least 5 months, or you are permanently and totally disabled. You did not provide more than half of your own support in the tax year. You are a U.S. citizen. You are unmarried. File using the married filing separately filing status. So if you're really looking at what qualifies you to be a dependent, there's definitely a link at H&R Block that kind of breaks down everything. But just know that the biggest rule of thumb is your parents can still claim you on the taxes up to 24 years of age. I think sometimes people think once they're 18, no longer can parents claim you on the taxes. However, it's up to the age of 24 is really the biggest thing. Okay, so the first question we have, and then I'll go into the next one, is, does this impact things like a stimulus check? Absolutely. So the stimulus check is based off how things were on the most recent taxes. So each stimulus check changed. And so in the beginning, the dependents were up to a certain age, and then the next one, the dependents were up to a certain age, and then they had more flexibility on the third one. And so if your parents claimed you on their taxes, then there's a possibility that they got the stimulus money on your behalf because there's a certain amount that they have for dependents. I'll get into like what criteria you can have here in a second on if you filed your own taxes and can you file your own taxes if somebody else claims you as a dependent. And I can talk about what that looks like with the stimulus as well too. So hang tight on the rest of that part. If I become a graduate student before 24, then can my parents claim me a dependent on tax returns and file as independent on FAFSA? Yes, great question. So the taxes and the FAFSA do not necessarily talk. So your parents can still claim you as a dependent on the tax return before 24. And let's say you're 22 years old and starting graduate school. Graduate school alone will make you an independent when it comes to the FAFSA. So those two are not intertwined. So you definitely can still be claimed as a dependent on taxes, but be independent on the FAFSA. All right, Caitlin, can you go to the next one? Okay, so here's where filing taxes comes into play. So if your parents claim you as a dependent on their taxes, they can get certain tax benefits. You may still also, though, be required to file your own taxes. So a lot of times people think, well, my parents claim me as dependent, so I shouldn't have to file taxes. Well, that's not necessarily true. If you're single and you earn less than $12,000, you're not required to file taxes. However, if you make more than $12,000, so let's say that you work part-time while you're in school, your parents claim you as a dependent, you make $15,000 a year, you are still required to file your own taxes. However, you have to say that somebody else is claiming you as a dependent, but you are still required to file your own taxes and your parents are claiming you as dependent on their taxes. I do want to say too that even if you make less than $12,000, you might miss out on tax refunds if you have any income at all. So there are certain things that I'll get into the next slide that are tax refund benefits or credits you can get from just being a student. Caitlin brought up the stimulus check as well too, or different ones like that. If you do not file your own taxes though, you can't get those tax benefits. There is a workaround because when you file taxes online, if you make less than $12,000 and you're single, you're going to get an error message online that says you're not legally required to file taxes, so you can't complete it. However, I'm telling you, you can Google a tax form, hand fill it out, physically mail it in. I know that sounds weird, but physically mail in the taxes. If the IRS receives taxes by mail, they're legally required to file it. So that's the workaround of why if you can't file it online, you want to mail in your taxes. The biggest thing I say is speak to a tax professional. I am not a CPA. I know enough to be able to assist people. I often say that's the beauty of working in the Student Support and Advocacy Center. We are advocates for people, but I'm not a CPA. So I shouldn't be giving you full on tax advice for your exact situation. However, you can definitely go to talk to somebody. You can go talk to H&R Block or various tax professionals. I think H&R Block even has a chat feature right now with, I was going to say taxes due tomorrow. However, taxes now got pushed back to May, but typically tomorrow. But you can do a chat feature to talk to them as well too and kind of explain your situation and see if you should file taxes. You might have to pay if you file taxes. However, you would have to weigh the pros and cons. If I have to pay $50 to state or federal taxes, but I get, $1,400, which counters the 50, is that worth necessarily filing your own taxes type thing? Caitlin, go to the next one. So the next question students often ask me when it comes to tax season are my grants and scholarships taxable? Great question. So really I say, let's look at in the breakdown of everything. So that really depends on how much you have received in a given year. So a year. So a tax year is the full year, January to December. Remember I said academic year started in fall and then went spring and summer. And then, there's also people call a fiscal year, which is July 1st to June 30th. So there's lots of different years. So the regular tax year is January 1st until December 31st. Yes, December 31st. I had to say the 30 days, have some time on my head for a second. So in that year, what was the total amount of tuition and fees? And what was the total amount of grants and scholarships you had? Grants and scholarships are what they call free money. If you ask anybody in financial aid, I didn't call it free money, but it's called the free money. It's the amount of money that you don't have to repay. If it exceeds tuition and fees, it then comes to you as a refund. That refund is then possibly considered income and should be reported on a 1098-T. So once that year is done, the student accounts office will send every student, they're required to send every US citizen a 1098-T. You then are responsible for taking that 1098-T form and turning it into the IRS. If you ask student accounts, is my scholarship taxable? They'll say, I don't know. And the reason they don't know is because everybody's situation is different. So, like I said, if you get if your total grants and scholarships, the free money exceeds tuition and fees, so let's say your tuition and fees is 12,000, but your scholarship is 14,000, you get a refund for 2,000. That 2,000 amount, not the 14,000, but the 2,000 amount that was refunded to you is considered income because it's money the university through your scholarships is paying you. Then possibly that 2,000 could be taxable, but this is where it gets tricky. Deductions come into play. So deductions are allowances from the IRS to taxpayers to subtract the total income in the year. Let me say that again because that can be confusing. Deductions are allowances from the IRS to taxpayers to subtract from total income of the year. After allowances, the difference is then the taxable. So various deductions could be, I have a dependent child, I work from home, and I have various office supplies that I can write off. These are all different ones, and you can kind of Google what general tax deductions there are, but this basically means that you can write it off. So if that's the case, then your total income might then change from 2,000 to 1,000 because now all of a sudden you have all these allowances that you could write off to reduce how much. So you then pay taxes on your overall taxable income for the whole year. So let's say that I had enough allowances to write it off from $2,000 to $500. That then just means that the amount that I have to pay taxes on is that $500 difference. So like I said, that's why sometimes you might get frustrated if you ask student accounts, do I have to pay tax on this? And they say, it depends. Their only responsibility is to give you a 1098-T. Your responsibility is to then turn it into taxes if you need to, and it will show if you've got any scholarship that exceeded tuition. The last thing I want to wrap up with is two credits that you can receive for being a student. You might have heard of them before, but the first one is the American Opportunity Credit, and then the next one is a Lifetime Learning Credit. Both of them are reasons why you might want to file your own taxes. So the American Opportunity Credit is a credit for qualified education expenses paid for an eligible student for the first 4 years of higher education. You can get a maximum annual credit of $2,500 per child, per eligible student. If your parents are filing you as a dependent, they are getting the American Opportunity Credit for you and not you, because it's viewing it as you are dependent on them. And so it's basically giving them credit for them paying for your education. So if you truly pay for your own education, you might want to work on your parents there to then say, should I file my own taxes? You both can't claim the American Opportunity Credit, but one of you could claim it. So in that case, if you are truly the one paying for your expenses, maybe that's something you want to be claiming. Next is a Lifetime Learning Credit. It's for qualified tuition related expenses paid for eligible student enrolled in an eligible educational institution. This credit can help pay for undergrad, grad, professional course degrees, and basically job skills. There's no limit on the number of years you can claim the credit. It's worth up to $2,000 per tax return. Now, these are not refunds. These are credits that you can have that kind of work similar to the deductions and allowance of everything. If you're kind of curious how those work, there's a link to the IRS website to kind of explain a little bit more, but you could definitely also, like I said, chat with H&R Block and kind of get more information. If you haven't ever claimed those credits before, you definitely want to, because it can definitely be credits to reduce how much you have to pay, or it could possibly turn into a refund if it reduces how much you have to pay. And now the IRS owes you the difference because you overpaid your taxes. So I will transition it now to Caitlin. And then if you have any questions, feel free to type them in the chat as well, and I will pass the baton.
Awesome. Thank you, Shannon. I always learn so much when Shannon talks, so this is great for me too. So next we're going to transition into relationships and finances. Like Shannon talked about a little bit, our relationships can really have an impact on our finances, both from this kind of law and documentation piece of things, but also just interpersonally as well. So we are going to start off by talking about boundaries. So oftentimes when I am talking to students about finances and some of their experiences where maybe they are in a relationship with someone and they want to practice some boundaries around finances, or for some of our students who are trying to become a little bit more independent from their parents, these are some of the things that we talk about with boundaries. So in the most basic terms, boundaries are what is and what is not okay for a person. They are really the thing that they can differ from person to person, and they can change over time as comfort and safety changes. So I always give this example of maybe you are you got a new roommate, and maybe your boundaries at first, you don't really share a lot with them. You're not really sure like how you feel about them yet, but then you become really close and you decide that you feel comfortable sharing things with them. You feel safe that you can share maybe things that are a little more personal. But also the opposite can happen. So let's say that you maybe were in a relationship with somebody, and they were your partner, and then you all broke up. So that can be a way that boundaries can differ then too, where maybe you don't tell that person as much anymore, or maybe you don't feel as comfortable going to them with, maybe questions or problems or something because you all broke up and your relationship is a little different now. So boundaries can work in a lot of different ways. Boundaries are clearly defined limits within which you are free to be yourself, with no restrictions placed on you by others as to how to think, feel, or act. So there's a lot of freedom with boundaries. We can feel like we are able to be ourselves, or able to make the decisions that are going to be best for us. So when we're talking about boundaries and finances, we're often referring to what is called material boundaries. So there are a lot of different kinds of boundaries, whether that be physical boundaries or emotional boundaries or sexual boundaries. But when we're talking about finances, in particular, most of the time we're talking about what we refer to as material boundaries. Material boundaries refer to money and possessions. They can include things that you spend money on. So whether that be things you have to spend money on, maybe you have to spend money on rent, or things you want to spend money on. So I know that Shannon was just telling me how like oftentimes like even little kids start with this like want and need conversation, which is really great. And that's kind of what we're talking about with these boundaries as well, of maybe you need to pay rent and you also want takeout tonight. Like, how are you figuring out where your boundaries are with money that you're spending? This can also be with like lending money to others, and personal financial habits and values. So when we talk about personal financial habits and values, we're talking maybe about some of the things we talked about at the very beginning of what does financial well-being mean to you? That could be things like being able to save, or what you're saving for. Maybe some folks are saving for a house. Some folks might be saying, I'm okay with renting an apartment and I would rather spend money on traveling. Like those are all things that we can think through of what are my financial habits and values that I have boundaries around that maybe might be different than other people. So next we're going to go into what are relationships. So we just did a really quick overview about boundaries, and then we're going to talk about relationships, because I believe that all healthy relationships really need to have boundaries within them. And we also want to recognize that there's a lot of different kinds of relationships. So Shannon mentioned a few during her part of the presentation, and we're going to talk about a few more. So relationships are just the way in which two or more people talk to, behave toward, and deal with each other. They're the way people are connected and interact with each other. Relationships can be platonic. So when I am saying platonic, I mean like friends, maybe roommates, maybe people in your classes, people in your student organizations, maybe people that you like are in a book club with or something like that. They're kind of just people in your life. Romantic relationships, that can be a romantic partner. Families can be a family that you were born into, sometimes that we would call a family of origin. They could also be people that you consider like a chosen family or a found family as well. And then professional relationships can be maybe people who you work with. It could be people who you see as mentors or who are part of your internship or something of that nature. and then other. So we recognize that not all relationships fit into boxes. Some relationships might just be sexual. Some relationships might be, relationships you had in childhood that you don't really have anymore, maybe like your neighbor growing up or something like that, but that could still be considered a relationship if they messaged you on social media someday or something like that. Or sometimes we talk about relationships where people have relationships with their professors. Those relationships are not going to be categorized in romantic or platonic, or I guess maybe familial if you have somebody in your family who's a professor. But really those relationships are still relationships. They just aren't falling into these categories. So any relationship that you have is a valid relationship. And just because it doesn't fit into these categories doesn't mean it isn't valid. So what is a healthy relationship? So I just talked a lot about what a relationship is and how those are defined. But healthy relationships always allow people to feel like they are supported and connected, but still feeling independent. So I think especially when we're talking about finances, this independence piece can feel really salient. So I think about especially some of our students who maybe they are going to start on their college experience for the first time. Maybe their parents or caregivers or guardians are having a little more support and connection than maybe they want. So how do we have some independence with that? How do we have those conversations? We might have folks too who are alum and they're thinking about, okay, I got this awesome degree from Mason. So how do I work within my relationships at my job or my relationships with my family now that I have kind of this part of myself where I have this degree, I have this part of my life. How can I still feel connected and supported to the folks, maybe my family or my friends who maybe don't have the same understanding that I do of what this degree might mean to me or things like that. Also talking about communication and boundaries being two major components of a healthy relationship. So we talk a lot about boundaries at SSAC. I think they're super important, but we can't have boundaries without having communication. We can't have healthy relationships without having healthy communication. So we'll go into a little bit about what does it mean to have communication as well. So Shannon has the question of how do I begin to talk to my parents about being financially independent from them? That's an excellent question. I really want to say it depends on the relationship that you have with your parents. So we want to recognize that some folks that might be a really easy conversation to have and just talking about like, hey, like, this is what I'm thinking. I am becoming more independent because I'm going to school and this is what I want my life to look like, and having those conversations. For some people, it might be a little more difficult. And that's when boundaries can really come in of, I know that as my parents, you really want to take care of me and watch out for me. And I have some boundaries around this. So it's okay for you to maybe be on my bank statement still. Maybe that's helpful for you to have parents being able to put money into your account if you need to pay for something for school or something like that. But maybe the boundary is, but you can't ask me every single time I use my debit card, why am I at the campus bookstore, or why am I getting Chipotle for the third time this week? There might be some boundaries there with that, and that's okay too. So starting to have those conversations as well. And I think the more that we practice having boundaries and conversations, the easier it becomes, especially with boundaries and having communication around finances. It's really important to be as calm as possible, as clear as possible. And kind of showing that you are ready for the responsibility of financial independence is part of having maybe that conversation in a way that's going to be really respectful, and sharing your own feelings, your goals, the resources you might reach out for. You can tell your parents, I got this because I can connect with Shannon at SSAC and she can tell me all about the stuff I need to know about FAFSA and stuff like that. That can be something too. And I also want to acknowledge that sometimes these can be really unsafe conversations. Folks might have parents or guardians or caregivers where it's not safe to have this conversation, where it feels like that person's going to either cause them harm or it's going to be a blow up fight or something like that. And if that's something that you are experiencing or maybe a friend is experiencing, SSAC is definitely here to help and provide support. Whether that be practicing having that conversation or ways to maybe get around that conversation in a safer way. So when we're talking about relationships, we ultimately are saying that whatever people feel like is healthy for them, that's the most important thing. So there might be some people who have different ways of viewing finances and relationships. Some folks might be, what's mine is yours, what's yours is mine. This is great. We can just kind of figure it out as we go. Some people might need more like specific outlines of things. Maybe for some people, they might be totally okay with being dependent on their parents financially. And some people might feel like they want a little more independence, and that's all okay too. The biggest thing with healthy relationships, especially as we're talking about finances, is people have the freedom to voice their concerns to the other people in the relationship. They feel like things can change over time. Maybe when they were a first year at the university, maybe they were a little more dependent on their parents. And then as over time, as they learned more things, as they felt like they were able to be more independent, then maybe that independence grew and they were able to have those conversations. Awesome. So how do I communicate about money? So we had a good start with talking about how do I communicate with my parents about finances? But there's also lots of different relationships where we're going to be communicating about finances. So to establish good boundaries, it's really important to have good communication. That's understanding another person through what they're saying, whether it be verbal or nonverbal messages. And those can really help create those clear boundaries. So let's say that you are talking to a partner and you all have decided that you want to go on vacation together. We're going to pretend COVID's not a thing for right now. And talking about like, okay, maybe you notice that when you say, I want to go on an all-inclusive cruise and this is so much money, maybe you notice they tense up a little bit. That's a nonverbal sign, and that's a way for you to check in and say, ooh, I noticed you got really tense right there. Is this maybe too much money? Because they might be thinking, oh, vacation is, going down the road and camping, and you're thinking it's an all-inclusive cruise to the Bahamas. The finances are going to be really different there. So noticing those clear verbal and nonverbal messages that people might be sending can be really helpful when having these conversations. Avoid diluting phrases. So these phrases might be things like, oh, haha, or no big deal, or no worries, or, I was just wondering, it's not really that big of a deal, maybe not, it's all good, things like that. Which are really like normal things for people to say. We almost want to couch things and like not make a big deal out of stuff. But that really doesn't help us communicate, because that's just sharing that we don't think it's a big deal, even though if it really is a big deal to us. So trying as best you can to avoid those phrases. Sometimes we might slip up. I mean, be like, oh, it's not a big deal. Like, you owe me $100, but it's fine. But it's also okay to go back and say, like, what, actually, I said it wasn't a big deal, but it really is. Can we figure out a way for you to pay me back or something like that? When we're talking about money, we want to be really clear and calm and firm. We want to be respectful and use as few words as possible. Especially, I think when we're talking about finances, that can be a really touchy subject for some folks. We all come from different backgrounds and worldviews and experiences, but we want to recognize that we don't need to justify our boundaries or get angry or apologize. Having healthy communication about money can be really normal, and we're all growing our skills to be able to do that. So these are some example phrases you might be able to use. So maybe you are going out with a friend, and you can say something like, I'm okay with paying for lunch this time, but I will not pay for your lunch tomorrow. So this could be a good phrase to use of maybe you often go out to lunch with a coworker, and you notice that every time you go out for lunch, they're always asking you to pay for lunch or spot them or whatever it is. Setting this boundary and this phrase of, I'm okay with paying for this, but not in the future, can be a really great way to set a boundary around money. I really appreciate you offering me a loan. I want to write down the terms and make sure we both agree before you transfer the money into my account. So this could be something when maybe a parent or a caregiver or maybe a friend is offering you a loan. They might say, no, we're family, we're best friends, we grew up together. We don't have to write any of this down. It's totally fine. But like we talked about at the beginning, relationships can change, sometimes for better and sometimes for worse. But also recognizing that like financial situations can change too. So maybe the person who is offering you the loan, they have the best intent to be like, it's good. I feel financially stable. Everything's fine. And then 5 years down the road, they're not feeling as stable anymore, or something comes up and they really need the money that that they had loaned you before. They might come back around and say, like, actually, this is what I need. So even if it's just something Shannon has shared, like even if it's just something like writing it down on a napkin or something like that, it doesn't have to be like super fancy notarized kind of stuff. It's just anything that says, this is what we're agreeing to. These are the terms of it. This is if I need to pay it back. This is when I'll pay it back. This is how much at how much time. Just to have a basic overview of what this loan is going to be like for both of you. And that's really almost a practice in consent as well. Because we're thinking through, what am I okay with? What are you okay with? We're both saying yes to this. We're both good with this. We both are agreeing with the terms, which, you know, I always love to talk about consent. So I'm going to apply it to anything we talk about. I'm trying to save money right now, so I can't go to the movies, but I'll meet up with you all after for our game night. So this can be a boundary to set with friends or family or just people you're spending time with, to share, you know, this is my value right now, is I am valuing that I'm saving money. This is a financial practice that I'm really trying to have. So because of that, I can't do X, Y, and Z, but I'd be happy to hang out with you for something that's like free or low cost, like a game night. I can put the water bill on my account, but I need you to Venmo me your share of it for the first of every month. If not, I'm not comfortable with having all of it come out of my account. So as you can tell, this is probably like more of a roommate conversation. My little furry roommate right now is scratching my couch, so she's going to stop doing that. But this is saying that, you know, maybe you are comfortable with having the water bill on your account, but recognizing there's some limitations there. There's some parameters around this. There's a boundary around this of, I need you to Venmo me for your part of it the first of every month. If not, then this is what's going to happen, is I'm not comfortable with that. So we're going to have to figure something else out. Does anybody have any questions? Or if you want to throw into the chat anything you're thinking about as some example phrases you've used before? No example phrases, that's okay. You can have mine for free. And that's really nice for me to say because we're talking about finances right now. So what if I feel unsafe or uncomfortable? So again, as I mentioned, there can be some times when these are uncomfortable conversations. Sometimes just talking about money with folks can be really uncomfortable. So it can help to practice before, maybe talk to a trusted person, whether that be a resource from SSAC, whether that be somebody that is a friend or a mentor, to practice, how do I have this conversation? How do I talk to this person about my roommate, about rent, or my parents about a loan, or whatever it is? There may also be times when it's actually unsafe to talk about finances. And if that's the case, there are definitely resources for you. We'll go into a few in a little bit. But SSAC, again, is always one of them. And then just remember to be gentle with yourself. These conversations can take a lot of time and practice. It's also not your fault if people in your life are not willing to communicate in a healthy way. Yeah, absolutely. It's like Shannon mentioned in the chat, like having open and honest conversations can really be key. Being okay to tell a friend that like you've covered lunch a lot and you're not comfortable doing that again, that's totally okay. And there's, yeah, absolutely. There's a good chance that your friend had no idea and they maybe weren't paying attention, or they thought it was okay and maybe it wasn't. Any examples to help others see that this isn't personal, like there isn't any distrust or personal issue with just setting a boundary? That's a great question. Yeah, because this can feel really personal, right? Especially because these are relationships. So I think naming that can be a really great thing to start off with, and saying, you know, this isn't personal. You're still my friend. I still care about you. I just feel like I need to set a boundary around things. I think it's almost sometimes easier with finances in a way, because there can be a concrete thing to say maybe what's going on for you. So you can say something like, it's totally fine. Like, I'm not angry with you, but I've just noticed that I've been paying for lunch a lot. And I was looking at my finances the other day, and I just noticed that I was paying more than I've been usually budgeting for my lunches out. So you can say something like that and kind of distance for a little bit, can be really helpful too. But I think the biggest thing is going to be having that honesty and a little bit of vulnerability in these conversations to say there isn't any distrust here. There's no personal issues going on or anything like that. I respect you as a person, and this is why I'm telling you, instead of just letting this go on. I think anytime we're setting a boundary, it's really the kindest thing we can do for the people in our relationships, because we're showing what the expectations are. We're showing what the needs are in our relationships and what we want out of that relationship. And it's so much easier then for people to meet those because they know what's going on. I hope that answers your question. So we're quickly going to go into how do I support someone? So we're just talking about general support. I often use this model when talking about sexual and interpersonal violence, but I think this could also be a way to support somebody who is maybe having some financial difficulties as well, and is maybe really experiencing some stress and different emotions that maybe are going along with some financial things. So we always start by believing we're not here to play detective or try to figure out what's going on or anything like that. We're really just here to believe the person, whatever story they're sharing, that's their truth. And we want to be supportive of that. Using encouraging words, like I hear you, I'm here for you, I understand. We want to be a little careful with that because we cannot fully understand anybody's experiences, but making sure that people know that we are there for them can be really helpful. Using encouraging words can also be, I know some resources. Would you like to connect with those? Or I can support you with that. Knowing your limitations. So we all have limitations. We all have boundaries within where we feel like we are comfortable and we're uncomfortable. So those limitations might be like, I am totally okay with talking to you about creative ways to save money. I have some cool apps we can use or whatever that is, but my limitations and talking about FAFSA. I even have that as my own limitation too, where I can say will be happy to have conversations with people about healthy relationships and boundaries and money and finances. But when we're getting into all of the details of it, I'm going to make sure that I connect them with Shannon if they would like, because that's my limitation of, I don't know all of that information, and we want to make sure we're getting people to the best possible resources. Letting the person make their own decisions. So things can be really complicated again with relationships and finances and things like that. So always letting the person make their own decisions, even if you think, well, they should just leave that person, their partner's no good, or why don't they just become independent from their family? I just went through a presentation and I learned about financial independence. Like they could totally do it. It's so easy. We're recognizing that everybody has their own things that they value. Everybody feels safe in different ways. So we want to make sure people feel like they have the autonomy to make whatever decision is going to be best for them. Knowing your resources. So like I said, we'll go into some resources in a bit, but there's lots and lots of resources at Mason and beyond, in different counties, in different cities and states and countries. There's so many resources that can support people. And we want to know those so that we can share them with people in case they need them. Know your reporting responsibilities. So I'm just going to skim over this a little bit because we don't need to go into too much detail, but if you are a person who has certain reporting responsibilities, you would know who you have to report to. And it's always important to share that information on the front end of things. Taking care of yourself too. It can be really difficult to hear that somebody that you care about is hurting or they're struggling. So making sure that you take care of yourself as well. And then respecting the process. Healing is a process, financial well-being is a process. All of the things that we talk about are processes, and that's okay. Sometimes days are going to be better than others, and we're really respecting the fact that it is a process. We're here for support. It's okay that there can sometimes be a lot going on. So we can wrap up with some resources. So we have our confidential resources on campus, our SSAC, the Student Support and Advocacy Center, where Shannon and I are. Counseling and psychological services and student health services are all confidential resources. And then our reporting resources on campus are compliance, diversity, and ethics, the Office of Student Conduct, and the Department of Police and Public Safety. So those folks would be resources where if you did disclose something like sexual and interpersonal violence to them, they would be reporting resources, whereas the ones before would not be reporting resources. They wouldn't have to share that information. And then we go into community resources. I know we have some folks here who might be a part of our community, so I definitely wanted to highlight these as well. These are all really focused on mental health and sexual and interpersonal violence, but there are also many resources like Shannon shared at the beginning, the different websites and things like that that can be financial resources too. And that is it for us. So thank you all so much. If you have any questions or anything like that, I'm sure we'd be happy to hear them.
Yeah, feel free if you want to. You can either turn off your mic and ask the question, or you can type in the chat. But that was great, Caitlin. Definitely learned a lot about just the communication when it comes to finances, because I think that can be a really difficult conversation people can have, just because finances is an awkward conversation. But I always tell people that finances involves everybody. So whenever I meet with a student, I always tell them, like, if you want to bring your spouse with you, I understand finances is not just about you. So really having that communication can be so crucial.
Absolutely, yes. And if you all ever want to practice having conversations, Shannon and I can even tag team where we can talk about the financial parts of it and the relationship parts of it and all of that stuff together too. Shannon, is it okay if I stop recording so people can feel free to